So I want to point something out that I think is funny here in just a second. But first, let me just introduce some friends of mine. This is Daniel and Jeremy and Anthony and Ashley, and I just want to thank you guys for being a part of this. Here's what I want to point out. I couldn't help but notice this as we're talking about this particular chapter. Like there's a balcony right here. And so, we should have thought this through. We could have had some Muppets there just like constantly critiquing us as we're going through this. But let me seriously ask you that question of this idea of just a constantly critiquing culture. Is anybody else feeling that?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
We live in a culture that is very opinionated.
Yeah.
And it's not just snarky. It's very pointed and feels personal. And I think that's different from the past, where people would say something kind of undertone. It's now very pointed and loud.
Yeah.
Which is, you can't get away from it sometimes.
Yeah, and the people who are doing the critiquing, they always have to be right. It's not it's not a conversation.
We're really
it's a
dug in,
butting
aren't
of
we?
heads.
Yeah.
And there's not any, there's reasoning from both sides, but there's very rarely any middle ground that's met in that critiquing.
Yeah.
And everything is presented as truth. Like this is what I believe, so therefore it's true. Where my fourth grader is learning how to voice his opinions, and he's saying, "In my opinion," fill in the blank.
Look at you, that's awesome.
The rest of us are just
Yeah.
we don't really do that as adults. We don't.
We're lumping everything in the truth bucket.
Yes.
So one of the things that I think for me was fascinating when I really just began to learn how artificial intelligence is actually, it's not just data collection. It really is paying attention to what I look at, what I read, what I click on, so that it just keeps giving me more of what I want and what I choose. And for me, I think it's an important thing to be sort of an educated consumer on this stuff. Really, it's not just data collection, but it is the algorithms that start to figure out what I like, what I click on, what I watch, what I read, and it has the potential to just keep informing me and showing me what I like and what I want.
Or what I think I like and want.
Yeah.
It's trying to tell me who I am, what I want, what I like, and what I'm supposed to think. And that gets to be a little dangerous.
Well, it's almost like, if we go back to the balcony thing, it really, this artificial intelligence thing is kind of ushering us into a balcony with people who look and think and vote and act and talk like us.
So it's kind of disappointing, though, because it feels like we're missing out on opportunities to hear other voices. Like, when I see or read stuff, I think of like, what would my friend Sam say about that? Or how would my friend Sarah process this, and what would her feedback be? But if our artificial intelligence just tells us more and more of what it thinks we want to hear, then we're missing out on all kinds of insights and opportunities to grow and get stretched.
I like the convenience of it, as dangerous as that is, and that's a slippery slope.
So we can get sucked into that because it's easier?
Yeah, because it's easy. It's just, here you go. Ooh, you like that. Oh, I know that you're going to like this. And therefore, it's just one step of making this decision or reading this information. You as you're saying, the view becomes narrower, and all of a sudden you're getting fed the same information again and again and again, and you start developing this. I've seen myself fall into this trap before, but you start developing this sense that, oh man, this is all over the internet. This is all over social media, to where you're only seeing like this very, very small tip of the iceberg. But then, the convenience of it too. You've got to really work to get out of that cycle and find other perspectives and sources.
You got to be able to turn it off and turn it down.
Yeah.
Because if not, it makes you stand on one side against the other. Now everybody's kind of enemy now.
So you guys are on. One of the things I wanted to ask you though was, how do you push against this? If the research that's cited in the book, is that, and I'm making artificial intelligence kind of like it's the bad, whatever. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It really is just that we are participating in something in cyberspace, and we are led into these places where we have, I think what the quote was, where we experience exaggerated amounts of agreement.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it's like, Daniel, when you're saying your friends might think differently than you, a lot of people will not, they'll avoid that. And they really do want to just hear more and more of what they are like and who they are and what they think like.
Well, because you get done with your Instagram feed and you feel great about yourself.
Exactly. So then, so what's wrong with that?
Becomes a cycle of where's your heart at? What are you doing on the feed or why are you going on and interacting in this capacity across all these different platforms? Are you there for really the interaction, or is it just to give yourself a little pat on the back to see that so and so gave you a like and a comment? But then on the other side of that too is, while there's this search for self-satisfaction, gratification, which becomes a slippery slope, you're also become so triggered and upset when someone might disagree with your point of view.
You have no margin because you don't have to function with margin. You're in that balcony with people who are just like you.
Right.
And it's a trap because we can't live in the balcony.
Well, the balcony is this comment section. It's kind of secluded.
Okay.
And if it's just me in the balcony section, I can just lob out what I want.
Yeah.
Because you can't
right.
get up here.
Right.
You can't jump up here. I just throw out whatever. And people have followings that way. And what's dangerous that I see is they start putting things out there and people think everybody hears this. No, there are 300 million people in our country.
Right.
Everybody's not doing this. Everybody
Right.
doesn't think this. And when you believe that, then it becomes a them and us. I think that's when the excessive amount that you're feeding yourself becomes dangerous then.
So here's the thing though, and we've talked a lot about the information that's coming towards us. What about when we're the angry Muppets in the balcony? What about when we're the ones, for a variety of reasons, that we just fall into that spectator role of, just like you said, we're just lobbing the critique bombs and the judgment bombs out there. How do you push against that?
For me, it's writing better headlines. So I'll read a headline and it'll wreck me for the day. And it's a reality and it's a truth that I need to pay attention to. But there are also lots of really great things happening in my life. So writing my own headlines to define my day. So husband and wife can't stop laughing during dinner. Woman steps outside and sees sunshine for the first time in 3 days.
So it's everything that the world has said in recent months. We need more good news. Mm-hmm. That's what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's real and it's in your
my good
backyard.
news.
It's your
Yeah.
good news. Okay,
Right.
that's very interesting.
But you
That's
almost
very
have
cool.
to overcome momentum to get there,
Yeah.
right? Like it takes
Oh, yeah.
a little bit of energy to push against some of that noise, some of that lobbing of the cheap shots to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But you just saying a couple of those things already, that overcame some of the inertia in my own heart of like, oh yeah, I can get, I'll take me some more of that.
Yeah.
You have to intentionally
It is intentional.
Intentionality,
Yeah,
yes.
It is. It
notice
is.
the small things that aren't so small because they're gifts from God. Like, that's not small.
Right, right. Yeah, this never settle life is intentional. We're making choices. But there's something that one of you said earlier about how Daniel, you were saying that you have people in your life who don't think like you, who don't maybe necessarily have your perspective. So did you intentionally seek that out? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think some of it is intentionality and some of it is, I don't think to enjoy someone's company and even to have spaces of comfort and vulnerability, you have to be with like-minded people. I think there might even be a false narrative that to be in a space where you can be authentic and open and vulnerable and or even just at ease, that everyone around you has to be exactly like you. And I think if you step in, it takes intentionality, like we've already said, but if you step into enough of those spaces and have enough of those interactions where it's like, wow, this person really does think differently than me, but we still connect on so many levels and there's a comfort and a mutual respect and trust, well, that's where some of the best stuff of life starts to happen.
And you learn from each other. That's
Oh
where
my
you
gosh,
started
yes.
this whole thing. You learn from each other.
And that's what makes it so sweet. You do intentionally have to seek those things out, but once you get a taste of that, then the person who may at first seem like the other becomes so close and near and dear to you and helps build you up and edify you, and God willing, some of your own thoughts start to build them up and help them change as well.
And how much better do you get to know God through that process too? Of it just expanding your horizons. God is bigger than the universe, and you begin to bring all these different thoughts and voices and opinions and friends and people from all over the world, different experiences. That just is like, to me, in viewing it, it's just like you get a little bit of a taste of the multifacetedness of the Creator.
Yeah, which you guys are right on the other chapter that we're really dealing with here is this whole idea of biblical hospitality. You're right on it. There is this choice that we make to welcome others. So in Romans 15, when it says to welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you, it's pretty obvious, how did Christ welcome us? You know, with grace, with open arms.
Lavishly.
Lavishly. I didn't deserve any of it.
Right.
That's a pretty high standard, but that's how we are to welcome others into our midst who are not like us.
Yeah, it's taking down the barriers of all the stuff you want to lie about. You take all that down, and there's a vulnerability in letting people in, and what that feels like, what that sounds like. To be able to say, you know what, I'm going to lower down all the walls I've built up for whoever the others are. To say, you know what, the table is even. And how do we start there? How do we find what's in common rather than what we maybe disagree on?
So would you guys talk about that a little bit more though? Because, and this is me, and I, mention it in the book, but I really do think that biblical hospitality is the Christian distinctive that could win the day. Yeah. We can talk about a lot of different things, and I think they're so important, but I think the world is desperate for this. Yeah. So when you say that you're going to put yourself in a space where you're vulnerable, which means this is somebody who's outside your circle, outside maybe your likes, dislikes, you don't know how the conversation is going to go or whatever.
Yeah.
Will you guys talk about that? Because I think that is something that we have to do, is to set the table and welcome people that are not like us.
Once again, the word intentionality, you have to be intentional. And because I want to learn, I want to grow, I have to learn how to listen differently, ask better questions, and recognize that if I'm going to sit across from somebody, we may disagree, but we both share that we are children of God. Yeah. And so there's some equity there that we both have with each other. So how then do we sit down and maybe not talk about the disagreements? What do we agree on? It's hard to get mad over good food. Can we sit down and just have a good meal and have a conversation and hopefully grow in that? And then talk about maybe why we think what we do, not what we think. And so I think you can invite people into, whether it's coffee, whether it's dinner, whatever, to invite people in. And I think the flip side of that is, it's not just, because I think if I invite somebody to my house, I have control then. I control the atmosphere, I control everything. Yeah. So that's one level of hospitality. The other part is, are you also willing to be invited in, where now you are the stranger?
Yeah.
And you don't have the security of controlling anything.
Yeah. You don't get the home field advantage.
You don't get the home field advantage. You have to walk in and it's like, are you willing to do that? Because you've got to be able to do both of these if we're really going to do this well.
And there is this, it's just a truth that as we do this, you're going to spend some energy because you're clearing a space. Yeah. You're clearing a space for a dialogue and maybe a relationship that wasn't there before. But you said absolutely, it takes energy. What are you thinking?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking of, you mentioned in the book of the Bedouin traditionally standing up until their guests are
finished. Meal.
Yeah. And not that where we are and for our cultural practices, that's not something that we do, is stand over our guests and be hospitable to them in that manner. But that's the first thing that came to mind when you have to use energy to do it, but being engaging, asking questions. And so Judy Dabbler has really great advice for getting to know someone, and it's asking 7 questions, 7 follow-up questions of, you start with one and you just keep on pulling a layer back and a layer back and a layer back and a layer back. And then when you get to this, I don't know if it's magic or just what it is in that once you get to that 7th question, but there's legitimate psychological impact and bond formed between the
intimacy.
two people. Yeah, the intimacy, but it takes work to think and act and ask those questions. And then also too, to put yourself, in that person's shoes and be curious enough and creative enough to take those layers.
Well, because it takes an authentic curiosity, right?
Yeah.
You can't just phone in 7 questions that go layers and layers. You have to actively listen and really start to get emotionally involved in what the person's saying, and I think that's where
you are ruthlessly committed to that.
Right. Yeah.
And I would say everything you guys are describing in all of this is very other-centered. It is a very selfless thing you are describing. You are not going to be the agenda. It's not going to be that old joke of, well, enough about you, what about me? It's you really are focusing on them and asking to serve them.
Well, it's part of the one question that we talk about sometimes is, tell me your story. And I think that becomes this equalizer, recognizing they have a story. We have these preconceived notions about other people, whoever they are, but we don't know their story. We're assuming. And when you start listening differently, you realize, oh, wow, I like that too.
Yeah.
I thought about that too. I remember that too. And it's like, oh, wow, now we really have something in common, and maybe we're not that far apart as I thought we were.
Right.
Because hopefully, the more you talk, it starts doing this, whether it's the questions, whether it's time, whether it's just talking about your kids, whether it's like, and now you wonder, we're sitting here laughing and enjoying, and you don't know when it happened. You don't know what the question was, but that fear went away, that anxiety went away, the comfort got there, and for some people, it's unfamiliar. They don't know what to do with that level of joy and carefree conversation with somebody that they don't know.
And we were made for this, Anthony.
Oh, yes.
And you and I talk about this in many different contexts, but what you're really describing, and this is where I sound like a pastor, so forgive me, but what you're really describing there is we are discovering, we are remembering, we are celebrating the fact that other person bears the image of the Most High God. That person, whether we agree on whatever, is an image bearer of God, and that changes everything so much.
Yeah, it does.
So much.
It's amazing when you start to change your perspective on preparing for a guest when you're thinking about them. So when I'm getting ready to have people over for dinner and I'm thinking about myself, I'm concerned about what I look like, what my house looks like, how my cooking tastes, when I start to think about them, when I'm setting the table, when I'm setting their plate down on the table and praying for them and inviting God into the conversation that we're gonna have, it's just better when it's focused on others.
Well, and I'm sure that changes your heart too.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than being in an anxious flurry to do X, Y, Z. I mean, you even just describing that, there sounded like a different tone in your voice, a slowness and intentionality, just love being laced into all of those actions versus something very self-aware, anxiety-ridden.
And think about the person at the other end who recognizes, you listened, you thought about me.
Powerful.
You knew this about me, that bothered me, or I like this, and you thought about that. That means it's huge.
So in one of the previous chapters, we were reminding everybody that, these small things, seemingly smallish things, can set off chain reactions. What you guys are describing sets off chain reactions of goodness. I mean, it's so shockingly different when we pay attention to each other, serve each other, pray for each other, love each other that way. So let me turn the corner now back towards our calling, because we are called to this. But everything you're describing, of course, can't happen at a balcony. It's the risk, it's the vulnerability, it's everything you guys have been saying. I want to ask you a question, though, because I think this comes up when people talk about making a difference in the world. Anybody here know what it's like to just wonder if your calling is impressive enough, or if what you're doing is impressive enough, or I mean, am I the
Yeah,
only one that's
absolutely.
ever thought about
No.
this? Or
Me, absolutely. And yeah, I think some of that comes from just there's such a high standard and really worship of those people that make it and make it young. To be young and wealthy in America is like the epitome of, the standard. So that puts a lot of pressure on everyone. And those, from as young as you can go online and read the newspaper, you see so-and-so made their X million dollar contract at 16. So that's just something that's embedded in your head and you constantly have to battle against. And what I am doing is it good enough? Is it good enough? Is it? And that's a real battle. I think for me, like in my process from figuring out how to navigate and really lean more on God over the last number of years is, and you said it a lot, is focusing on that image bearer component of, if I can focus on that first and have that be the center of my calling.
you are the image bearer.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Having my calling be the image bearer, and then whatever I do is it's the outpouring. It's that for me leaves a lot less. It leaves me a lot less anxious approaching the task or where I am in the present, and allows me to be a lot more fully to where it's just okay. Let's test, hypothesize, and then if it doesn't work out, we'll just pivot to something else until kind of settle into a role.
Okay.
But God doesn't leave anything for waste.
Okay.
Along the way.
How about the rest of you guys?
I think
And
it's
gals.
yeah, I think it's always trying to measure up. What does that measure up to be? And you think, seek ye the kingdom. Yeah, but all this stuff. And that becomes this battle of, yeah, but God, I see this. And am I really measuring up? And what are those things that at this stage of life that are kingdom things, which means they can't be about me.
Yeah.
And for me, what is legacy? Where am I pouring into somebody else so that that is where the fulfillment is.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't in stuff. I've had the stuff. I've had the cars, the cars, the houses, the trips, all empty. It wasn't fulfilling. Then you realize, well, wow, when you start pouring into people, when my daughter started getting older and older, I'm pouring into them and things, it's like, oh, this is what you meant, God. This is what he's doing with us that we ought to be doing with somebody else.
So what would you say to people who, like, right now are saying, that's cool, way to go, but I don't know that I've got that in, like, I'm too young, I'm too old, I didn't do this, I did too much of that. What do you say to somebody who is believing, whether it's stuff that's coming from the balcony or whether it's stuff that just rings in our own heads? Anybody want to, what do you say to that? Ash, I think you were going to.
Well, because it starts as little kids, right? What do you want to be when you grow up? And that's a harmless, wonderful, beautiful question, but like, who are you right now?
Yeah.
Who is God calling you to be right now? And I think sometimes we're afraid to even acknowledge that we have a calling because we're so busy trying to do and impress and to be enough. So I would say, you think you're too old, you think you're too young, there's no right time. Who are you right now? Who is God calling you to be right now? What is the next step for you?
So what's kind of ringing in my ears is, what is the next faithful step? I know for me, sometimes it's like, I need to know this is this big, grandiose adventure, or it's gonna have this big, profound payoff, and then I'll get after it and have this plan and da-da-da-da-da. And sometimes those are the things we need to plan ahead for and make contingencies for and things like that. But sometimes God just asks you to take that next faithful step, and it might be really unimpressive at first, but you line up 5, 10, 1,000 of those next faithful steps, and kind of like what you're talking about, you look back and suddenly there's a legacy there. Suddenly there's people you've impacted in ways you may not know this side of heaven. And some of that, at least for me, I don't know about you guys, that goes way beyond my own cleverness or my own planning or even the scope of what it is that I think I want to accomplish.
Absolutely, but you're in the game.
Oh yeah, you
You're
can't do that from
doing
the
something.
sidelines.
You're out of the balcony, so to speak.
And your game is different than somebody else's. And I think whatever God does, it's impressive to him. We spend a lot of time trying to impress somebody else. look at me, look what I've done. It's like, I was like, I'm not impressed with that. Just do what I gave you. And if you just wear out the space that you have, that's kingdom. And if it's just being a good husband or a good wife, good parent, if it's being a good friend, you've accomplished it. It's not about always taking over the world. And so.
And that becomes, I think, check me on this, I think that becomes a kind of antidote to some of the stuff that we started off talking about, the cynicism and the hypercritical, and whether it's us throwing things out of the balcony or us, ducking for cover when people are chucking it at us. When you're in that significant life that you're describing, that is in the present, in the now, with the eternal God who loves me enough to say, I'll be with you right here, right now. That's it.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's
it becomes, you start developing an antidote to that because of him.
You have a resilience, you have a hope.
You have a peace, which means I don't chase everything, because I'm at peace with this. This is space that you gave me.
Yeah.
And if I can be content in that and who he made me to be, I might stop throwing stuff out the balcony.
And it's interesting you mentioned the too young, too old piece.
Yeah.
Because some of the people I've learned the most from are people who some might look at and be like, oh, they're too old to do X, Y, Z. And I look at them and they have a lifetime of taking that next faithful step.
Yeah.
And you get some time with some of those folks, and they're too busy living a rich, fulfilling, impactful life to start getting cynical, and they don't have time to waste to
That's a
lobby
great
this,
point.
that, or the other.
Yeah.
They've seen a lifetime of what it means to take that next faithful step, and it's like, oh, I'll take that path too. That is a life that has paid off and is rich and fulfilling.
Yeah.
So that great quote from the book of Esther applies to each of us. You were made, you were created, you were called for just a time as this.
And it's such an amazing thing to think that from creation, I was made for a time like this. And which means I have purpose. And I was created to do something.